Welcome back to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be doing our first real-time mock draft on our YouTube channel for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, what is this, first of all? A real-time mock draft is where we do these picks with other general managers, basically other fans, who are controlling the other 31 teams in the league and selecting the players that they want the most for those teams at their selections. So what this does for us makes it really interesting. We're going to get different outcomes each time. We're going to have to adapt. We're going to be limited on the time we have to make trades, to make selections. And so, while that may be either fun or painful for me, it should provide something entertaining for you, and we'll see whether you like it or not. We'll definitely try to do a little bit better than the last time I tried this, because although you haven't seen it and you never will, I did attempt this 3 days ago, and it went awful in like every single way. Just like, I'd go to trade for a player, he would go off the board 5 seconds before I got the trade, or I'd go select a guy, he'd go the pick before me. It was just really obnoxious stuff, but I don't think that's going to happen again. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and kind of just talk in general about how we're looking at this draft as the Chicago Bears make their first selection here. So first of all, we're going to skip around a lot here, so you will not see this whole video and everything that I see. This will probably go on for about 7 or 8 hours, and I'm starting this at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's a really long process. But what you will see is you'll see the selections, you'll see where we make trades, all of that sort of stuff, pretty much any big updates. So you get the condensed version that's a little more exciting. But for our draft, you know, what we're really looking at, we're not too keen on drafting higher than 24. We're not really looking to move up. But if there is a really good player available, then we're going to move up for him. You know, we'll try to make a trade if we can. If we can't, we can't. Otherwise, we're probably going to be staying put at 24, trying to make a move. And, you know, we'll see. But say the board doesn't look good at 24. Might try to trade back. Might try to take another prospect that would be a little more worth it at that selection. And, you know, accumulate some capital while we do that. So, as far as needs and how to consider that, because we haven't gone through free agency. We really don't know what the Jaguars are going to be looking at in the draft if they need to fill any needs. But here's what we do know. NFL teams, when they go into free agency, they are considering that their opportunity to fill all of their needs on the roster. Now, sometimes there's an exception to that. So, for example, like a team may say, okay, we need to draft a young quarterback. We know that. So they're not going to solve the quarterback position in free agency. Or like the Jaguars last year, they know that they need an edge rusher, but they didn't pick it up and solve it in free agency because they had the first selection. So they already knew we can choose an edge rusher. And it was pretty clear throughout, honestly, the entire draft process last year, as much as fans wanted Evan Neal, that what the Jaguars were going to be looking at is which edge rusher to select first overall. So, you know, for this draft for us, that's really not going to be the case because we're drafting later. And so what we're going to assume is that the Jaguars have found solutions to these positions or have players on the roster already that they feel confident in. So, you know, that may be hard to believe. It may be hard to expect this team to be able to resolve their issues through free agency with the cap space situation they have, but I think I can genuinely say that there is a way to do it. You absolutely can. Now, you might need to say goodbye to a player on your roster. You may need to do a lot of restructuring, but they could find solutions to these positions for this next year. And I think they will. I think they're going to make a lot of moves for people. I don't think it's going to be like they're going to sign this guy for $15 million a year or anything like that. But there will be a lot of low-key signings that they're going to go after. There is for every team, every year. So we will see that. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they hit slot corner in free agency. I wouldn't be shocked if they got a veteran pass rusher or a second tight end. Maybe they bring back Dan Arnold true. It's Chris Manhurts. That's the guy I'm thinking of. They could do moves like that. They could get in a receiver in free agency for really cheap. Guy like McCole Hardman or Paris Campbell, the two I mention probably every single time. Running backs are cheap. Like, point is, this team could probably address those needs before heading into the draft. So for us, the most important part of this is drafting good value. And we do consider in that, will this player be starting in the future? How long until they are a part of this team? Because that is part of value. But even if they're not a huge player that first year, if they are more worth it in the long run by far, then I think you go after that player. So that's how we're going to look at this draft. We'll go ahead and scroll down so you can see some of these first picks. You see the division rivals. Both got answers to quarterback, but it'll be a little bit till we pick. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead, cut off this section. We'll fast forward. It'll either be a little before the pick or right before the pick, depending on whether we're trading up or not. So see you then. All right, so we are back now. 22nd pick of the NFL draft has just been finished. Baltimore Ravens have selected Cam Smith out of South Carolina. Actually, pretty good pick. I'm not sure what their corner situation is, but a really valuable player. We are in a situation right now where we've really got, I think, two big names I would consider. Actually, three at this point with this pick. Those being Michael Mayer, Osiris Torrance, and DeJuan Jones. And you could even throw in some other players too if you want. Jackson Smith and Jigba be a really nice player to add, although there's questions about him playing in the slot, and if he does, obviously you have Christian Kirk there. Other than him, Anton Harrison is a really nice tackle. Clark Phillips is a really nice guy if you want someone to fill in the slot. And, a dark horse pick could be Antonio Johnson. Be a good option for the slot as well. And not only that, but he's pretty good at covering tight ends, something this team struggled with. Or do you go pass rusher? Got some names here. So what we're looking to do is ideally trade out of this pick. I've already let other managers know. So we'll see if we get any offers. I'm unsure of that. Now, if we don't get an offer, what I'm thinking at this selection, and part of this too is that we took Michael Mayer the last time, so I don't want to just do the same thing over and over. But I want to try something a little different here. So if we're selecting here, out of Michael Mayer, Osiris Torrance, and DeJuan Jones as my options, as much as I like DeJuan Jones and Michael Mayer. Oh, and I think he just went off the board, actually. Looks like. Looks like it. Yep. He went to the Vikings. That does not seem realistic. But anyway, there's a good chance he's off the board before the Jaguars select. I have DeJuan Jones and Osiris Torrance here. I'm going to go with Torrance. I think he's the better pick. And that really depends on, how you see these players, of course. And if DeJuan Jones is what all the hype says, then, maybe he is better than Torrance. But the thing is, with this team, you do have tackles already for the long term. So how you see DeJuan Jones fitting into the team, it might be kind of hard to see him getting into a role at tackle. And, I just mentioned I want Michael Mayer off the board. I didn't want to have the option. But I think when you look at those players, if they're going to be confined to the guard spot, like if that's the only place that's really going to have an opening for the foreseeable future, and you have to factor that into your value when you're getting these players for 4 years. Osiris Torrance is a better guard right now. He's going to upgrade your run game immediately, and he's a player who can play on both sides. You know, he could end up even being a replacement for Brandon Scherf if you want to move on from the contract. So I think Torrance actually makes a good amount of sense. And now that we're down to about 20 seconds left, we're going to go ahead and draft him. We know we're not getting any offers. So Osiris Torrance is going to be the pick for the Jaguars. Now, depending on how this board falls, maybe we move up a little bit, try something out. There's some players on here I would heavily consider trading up for, but at the same time, I think there could be some sneaky players available at, what would it be, 56 for this team? So right now, Jackson Smith and Jigba still on the board, so you have Jalen Hyatt here. I don't think he's as highly rated as this claims he is. He's not that good of a receiver to me, but you've got some receivers on this board pretty high. Even Zay Flowers. I think you could have a really good receiver be available at 56, especially if teams get afraid to select them so high, because we saw a lot of these teams go after people in the second and the third round that should have been going rounds later. And, you know, aside from a few, they didn't really get production out of them for what they wanted at those selections. And it was really this huge response to how things were going in the receiver market, that people were scared to pay a ton of money, so they wanted to draft instead. So maybe teams kind of flip the other way this offseason, and we see a really good name be available. So we'll have to see how the board falls. Because, hey, I mean, quite frankly, if there's a good receiver on the board at 56, we could go that route. But let's talk about something else. We went offense here. You know, we could look at the defense. You've got, I'm not looking at linebacker for one. We can't do that as much as I want to talk about, oh, we're just getting best value. Like, I'm not looking at a linebacker because of what they did last offseason. But on the defensive side of the ball, Isaiah Foskey has a ton of potential. Nolan Smith, I can't see him for a moment because we got the Giants picking. Nolan Smith is a player who was great last year, and then his final season in 2022 wasn't as good as what you wanted to see a receiver go off the board there. But that's because he got injured. And then you go down, you got B.J. Ojulari. Fantastic pass rusher. You could argue that he is the most refined in that category. The issue is, you know, the size a little bit, and then also with him, you know, as a run blocker, like, is he just a one-trick pony? Or I guess that's not how I want to say that, because he has a lot of ways he can win. But the point is, like, is he just a pass rush specialist? Kind of like we saw with Yannick Ngakoue, where the Jaguars didn't want to pay him like $20 million a year because he can only rush the passer. You can't use him on every down. I mean, you could argue he's not even a full-time player. So, just some thoughts on that. We'll see how this board falls, but we could trade up. There's some good players on here, and we even see, like, Derek Hall, for example. He's a guy we picked up in the last draft. So, with that said, we'll be back for our next selection. You'll either see us a little early or at 56. All right, so we are back a little before our second selection. Had some possible opportunities to trade up, didn't end up taking them. Just didn't really make a ton of sense to trade up as far as it would have been, and too much capital. So what we're looking at now is essentially a board that's kind of barren of a lot of the players you hope to land around here. Darnell Washington, one guy I would have absolutely selected. Rashee Rice is another player I was really hoping he'd fall. Your picks really at this point just not available the way you want them. So really here, I mean, my top guy probably on my board would be Derek Hall. probably followed by Luke Musgrave. So this is about right. As far as other options, Cody Mock you could look at. You already hit offensive line though, and Mock can be looked at as someone who could play a few different positions. I think he just flew off the board. Yep. Jordan Battle and Chris Smith would be good players for the secondary. And then you got some defensive linemen. You do have those available here. So you've kind of got two different stories here. Gervon Dexter has all the size, but there's worries about him as a player now. And then you've got Kalijah Cansey, who, looks great in a lot of ways, but they wonder, can he translate to the pros? And what about his size? Because his size is not ideal for a defensive lineman. He's going to definitely struggle in the NFL with that a bit. And then you're kind of going far down the board at this point. So, I'll be honest, I'm not too thrilled with how this fell. And I think if I could go back, I probably would have traded up a few selections to get Rashee Rice. Just did not expect the Seahawks to take him. That was one of the last things I would have expected, yet, that's their selection. So now they've got 3 really good receivers there. We'll see if we get a trade offer. But at this point, I think it's between Derek Hall or Luke Musgrave. I see an argument for Dexter and Cansey. And I think, Dexter could be your answer to the defensive line. Let's look a little bit into Gervon Dexter. And I don't want to just draft Florida players either, because that's the way we're looking right now. So where he's played, majority of his snaps are at defensive tackle, essentially. He's played a little on the edge, but that's primarily where he's lined up. So, that's good. That's where essentially you want to have your impact from a new player. As a pass rusher, though, you see there's not really good grades. And overall, he just didn't have that great of a season. So I'm not sure if I'd want to go with that. And then Derek Hall goes off the board. Well, this selection might be really easy. Because with Hall off the board, I think you've kind of got a runaway here. Luke Musgrave probably makes the most sense out of all these players. And then, John Michael Schmitz, maybe he would have been an option for you if you hadn't got Osiris Torrance already, because you could say, hey, maybe he plays guard. But he's mainly a center, and you just drafted Luke Fortner. As far as these other options, I think the biggest arguments would probably be for Kalijah Cansey and Zach Harrison. But I think I look at this board and I see an opportunity for the offense where you can get the Jaguars a second tight end. You can get Doug Pearson, that second tight end, someone who has a ton of upside, really all the physical tools to succeed. He may not be as flashy as what you see from Darnell Washington as far as the physical attributes, but he's not too crazy far off. The size, I think it's probably about 20 pounds and an inch, but I think this could be the ultimate kind of Jaguars pick. Get a guy who's been injured, guy with a ton of potential, and this fits into what Doug Pearson would like to do with the offense. Have 2 tight ends, have that set, and add another receiver essentially for Trevor Lawrence. So that's going to be our pick here. So would I have preferred something else happening? Absolutely. At this point, I think it would have been nice if you had a really good receiver fall to you just for the value of that pick. Or, say you trade up a little farther and you got a guy like DeJuan Jones in the early first round. Or say that B.J. Ojulari fell. That's ideally what you want. And that's one I really hope that he falls into the mid-second round. I think that would be a fantastic ad. But I think what you've done with this draft still, I think it's pretty good. You've essentially, at this point, you've got yourself an answer at guard for the future. someone who should be really good at the position, one of the better players in the NFL. And that is a huge need for this team as well. Obviously we talked about drafting for value, and maybe you want to argue why would you take guard in the first round, but Torrence is an arguably top 20 prospect in this draft, and we got him outside of that range. But Torrence as a player, I mean, he brings in what you need, and he fills a hole, and ultimately, that is one of the questions the Jaguars will have to answer, because when they played Chris Jones, as much as Chris Jones is pretty much going to have a great day every week, you got to be able to slow him down. And the Jaguars just weren't able to a lot of the time. He still got through. They struggled on the offensive line when they played the Chiefs. And if I'm the Jaguars, I'm building this team to defeat Kansas City. That's the big dog right now. And they might be the big dog in the entire NFL. Given the Super Bowl's, for me, one day away, and you might be seeing this video before or after. I'm not sure when it'll be uploaded. But Kansas City is your target to beat. That's the team you want to take on. So I think O'Cyrus Torrence makes a lot of sense for the Jaguars in the first round. Maybe not the absolute best scenario, but I think he was the best player on the board for this team. And then Luke Musgrave as your second pick, along with Torrence, he's an upgrade to your blocking. So you've made two selections that help out your quarterback, help him take the next step heading into year 3, where we've seen a lot of these quarterbacks break out. Musgrave has the potential to be as good as any other tight end, except guys like Kelsey, and maybe you throw in some other names in there of the top tight ends, but Kelsey's just really in his own tier at this point. I like what you do. Now, as far as what you want to address after this, I think you'd like to move to the defensive side of the ball, but say there's a really good offensive prospect who falls. Not that I can name anyone specific out of this list, but if one of them is available, sure, go back to the offense again if you need to, but we'll probably be looking at the defensive side of the ball, getting an upgrade there. There's still places that you'd want to improve, but hey, we're looking for value, and I think with these two selections, you got really good value at the picks, especially for the way they want to run this team. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and just get through this next round and see where we select next. All right, so we're back a little early here. Right now we've got about 12 selections remaining before our next draft pick. And so, while I talked about the defense before and moving to that side of the ball, I think there's a really good opportunity coming up that I don't want to miss on. And so, on this board, now we see the pop-up in the way. So Andrew Voorhees off the board. On this board, on the defensive side of the ball, at this point, there's not really anyone who wows me or blows me away. Essentially, I think you've got Travius Hodges-Tomlinson and DJ Turner as guys you could look to develop at corner that could be really good. But that's really about the biggest stuff that I see. And then there's some players that people like J.L. Skinner, for example. Some people also hate him, but I'm not as well educated with him. He's a guy I still got to study. Well, there's a couple guys on the defensive side of the ball. On the offensive side of the ball, there's a player who makes a ton of sense for the Jaguars. And before I talk about him, we're going to go ahead and shoot a trade offer. We're going to look to move up with the Green Bay Packers here. And we'll send this officially once we are through with this pick, because I want to make sure that this player isn't off the board. So who I'm talking about for this selection is Xavier Hutchinson. And I think even though you hope maybe you land him at 88, He's a player that makes so much sense for Jacksonville if they're going to find a receiver in this draft. I mean, I think he's a perfect fit for this team. So the first thing, Hutchinson is a local to Jacksonville. Grew up here, loves the place. I don't know why I say here. I'm in Missouri, but I've been there a bit recently. Hutchinson would obviously, first of all, love to play for the Jaguars. As far as a personality, Hutchinson is a player that I think would fit great with the Jaguars. Not a cocky guy, not overconfident. I know he had one time in college where he made a stupid decision, and we see DJ Turner go off the board. So we'll shoot this trade now. But, you know, with that, I mean, he recovered from that pretty well and learned from it. I think it had to do with a celebration off of a touchdown, so it wasn't a huge deal. It wasn't like a big off-the-field concern, just something small. And so, with that said, you know, I think he's a great mentality fit, but you also look at the kind of player Hutchinson is. Oh, dang, there we go. Trade has been... That might be the error one. Let's see. Okay. Yep, so we are on the board. So we'll go ahead and take him real quick. Now, Hutchinson, as a player, you know who his comp is, if he plays on the outside, is very similar to Marvin Jones, who you're probably going to be saying goodbye to at the end of this season. Unfortunately. And he might come back, but I think for Marvin, the more logical thing is for him to go to another team where he can start. I think that would be better for him. But Hutchinson profiles as a very similar guy with the contested catch. And he's someone who has a ton of upside, not many huge flaws. It's more so that, you know, Hutchinson doesn't have like one thing that just absolutely blows you away. Like, you know, he's not necessarily a world beater in several aspects. Now, say the Jaguars want to play him a bit in the slot, you know, people also compare him to Keenan Allen's play style in the slot. Keenan Allen, one of the best players in football, not necessarily a top 10 receiver anymore, but he's been really good for the Chargers. And heck, probably for another team after this year with what you hear going on there. So, if the Jaguars want to land a receiver in this draft, I think the most logical choice that they have as far as where they select him, what they do, I think it's Xavier Hutchinson. I really do. I think he's just a really smart option and a really good story to bring back to Jacksonville. So, you know, now we look at this draft and we've hit offense with all three of our picks. And at this point, you might just call this an all-offense draft, and you definitely can find some issues with that because you want to get guys on the defensive side of the ball too. But you look at what you've done with the offense. There's a lot done here. There's a lot you're doing for the future and getting really good prospects all over the place for this team. And the way we're considering this draft is that the Jaguars heading in have addressed a lot of these needs. So in this scenario, there's already a slot corner on this team. They've already found someone to fill in the void of pass rusher. Not that those are just, you know, they got like the best player that was available and now they're like huge strengths, but like they've got players that they feel confident in playing there. So they're not pigeonholed into selecting that in the draft. So that's how we're looking at this. So with that said, I think the way this board fell, you know, pretty much at every single pick, I think it makes sense to go offense with these. I think Osiris Torrance, at the point where he was the best player on the board. And maybe you can argue that for a cornerback there, or even say DeJuan Jones, but that's another offensive player. At 56, for me, there was no other player at that point on the defensive side of the ball that I could have considered really closely with Luke Musgrave. Kalijah Kancey was probably the closest, and there's a lot of questions about him profiling to the NFL. And then at this pick, there really wasn't, once again, anyone who just blew me away. Maybe JL Skinner, you like him, and he's a guy I'll have to look into more for sure. But other than that, it's just kind of normal prospects. Travius Hodges-Tomlinson, I like him a lot too. But honestly, a lot of the reason why I go to Hodges-Tomlinson so often in drafts is because right now that is a bigger need than receiver. So if it's not as big of a need, especially when I consider how the Jaguars look at prospects, how they choose, I think it makes more sense to go after Hutchinson because they're going to care a lot about size. And when you're 5'9", that's going to provide some problems for Bulky. So all that considered, I think so far we've got pretty good selections here. Now, we're going to have our 4th round selection still, and what we gave up for capital, we essentially moved back a little over a round out of the 4th round. So we'll still have a 4th round selection. And when we look at this, one thing that will probably be off, because I can't get the trade to go through, the Calvin Ridley compensation on here is not updated. So eventually, what's going to happen on here is instead of a 525 here, as in 25th selection of the 5th round, this will be 625. Because once Calvin Ridley is reinstated, we'll be giving up a 5th rounder instead. And then it's another pick the next year, depending on how he does. So, with all that said, let's go ahead and see what we do for the next pick. Alright, so we are back now in the 4th round of this draft. We got one more selection to go by before we have our next pick. Now, with the way this board has fallen, I think it looks like we're going to keep on the offense, quite frankly. Kenny McIntosh, top of the board right now. Best prospect available according to the rankings on here. And quite frankly, I think I would agree with that. I like some other guys at this pick. I think if you can't get Kenny McIntosh, another player I really like that honestly probably won't be liked much by the Jaguars because of size, is Deuce Vaughn. Fun player to watch from Kansas State. Other guys you could look at would be, for example, if we needed a receiver, Dontavian Wicks would be a pretty solid choice around this area. Joe Tippmann, if you move him to guard, maybe he's got something there. I mean, you see pretty good size here for a player. Outside of that, you've, Jaden Reed, even throw him out. He's a guy a lot of people like now. And then you got 2 guys on the defensive line. Carl Brooks, I know, is a person that a lot of people are talking about as a snub out of the combine. He's a pretty solid player. If he bulks up, maybe he's really good at the next level. And then you got Colby Wooden, who, has all the physical side of football, but quite frankly, it's his consistency and his mental side of the game that needs to develop. So if you get that, you feel pretty good about him. So I think with this selection, really depends on where the Steelers go here. If McIntosh is available, I think that's got to be the pick, even though it's offense again. And I think he is. See what happens here. And the Steelers select Byron Young. So, quite frankly, as much as this isn't great for the defensive side of the ball, and I'm sure there's going to be some people who don't like that, and that's absolutely fine. I get that. This is a fantastic draft for the offense. I mean, you have to love it. You pretty much got everything you wanted to happen. You got your final piece on the offensive line. Just a really good guard that you can pair with Brandon Scherf. You've already got your tackles in place. You could have Jawan Taylor come back, keep Walker Little as a swing tackle. You've got your center and Luke Fortner. Now at tight end, you've got 2 guys there that, one of them is already really good, and the other one has all the potential, and he's under Doug Peterson. At receiver, you've got Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Xavier McIntosh. Or I don't know why I said Xavier McIntosh. My bad. Xavier Hutchinson. Not trying to do him disrespect. I think that's a fantastic receiving core. You have to love that group of players. And then you got Trevor Lawrence, obviously. And at running back now, you've got Travis Etienne, and you got Kenny McIntosh, who's a versatile player. He can not only just do running back, but he's a receiving back. He can throw him the ball. He can play in the slot. Heck, this guy can play outside. If this is the draft for the Jaguars, yes, you could be concerned. They're spending a lot of capital on the defensive side of the ball, the offensive side of the ball. But look at last year. The defensive side of the ball was where the focus was, and specifically in the draft. You know, they went 2 defensive prospects right off the bat. Then they got a center. Then they went back to defense again. You know, there was a big focus on that. The only picks that weren't defense was Luke Fortner and Snoop Connor. And only one of those picks has really been super valuable to the Jaguars this last year. So we're doing the opposite here. And I think at this point, if you're looking at the offense, as long as these players are what you expect them to be, what answer do you have? Or question. My words are all over the place. I apologize. What question would you have about the offense at that point? You could have your tackles take a down play or downturn play. You could have a receiver go down. You could have that sort of stuff happen, but you have a complete offense in Jacksonville. And so, with that said, we're going to go ahead and get ready for this next pick. It'll be a little over an hour for me, so I've got a while waiting, but you've only got a few seconds, so we'll be right back. All right, so we're back here a little early. Got our selection up in about 17 picks. Now, we've got a name on the board that we're going to look to trade up for here. You see this trade has been accepted here. The rejected one was just trying to swap capital with the Falcons to update the Calvin Ridley trade, but didn't get accepted, so we're going to use the capital this time. And probably in about a week, that'll change, because at that point, Calvin Ridley will be reinstated, and the capital they give up will now be a 5th to the Falcons. So what we're going to do here, it might be a little down the board, but I want to make sure we secure this guy. One person I think that could be a really good starter in the slot for the Jaguars at this point, and kind of a consolation prize if you can't address the slot early on, and you want to get a guy who's probably just going to play there primarily, will be Jartavius Martin. So, as you see, 152 on the board. It's not an amazing prospect, but Martin is a player that some guys are really high on. A lot of people do like, that can play at a really high level in the slot for the Jaguars. He's honestly, to me, kind of the last fit for that position in the draft when you look at the value from top to bottom. Once you get so far, you just really can't rely on players to be starters, and there's a chance Martin might not even start the first year. But I think you can develop him into a solid slot corner that plays well for this team. And so he's going to be our selection here. Now that we've made this selection, we've given up some capital. We gave up our early 6th and early 7th. And then the 5th round pick, the early one. So I think the Jaguars in the draft will do something similar. Not necessarily that it'll be this exact trade, but they're going to consolidate these picks a bit. I don't think the Jaguars are going to simply select 9 players on draft day. We saw the same thing last year where they had a bunch of selections and they consolidated. I think that's the best way they can approach it. This team doesn't really have room for 9 new players, so use your extra capital to move around and to select the guys that you want. And so that was a player that would be a guy I would like to have on this team. I think he would be one of the better fits at this point in the draft. So, you know, we traded a good amount of capital for him, but what you got to consider, once again, is that who you're drafting in the 6th or 7th round, there's a good chance they don't make the roster with this team. I mean, for example, you remember Jalen Camp? I believe he was a 6th-round selection. He didn't make it, no pun intended, through training camp. So you got to look at that and understand if those picks don't carry a whole ton of value. And you can get UDFAs. You can go after players after the draft that you think should have been taken a lot earlier. So your later selections aren't going to be worth as much. So we're going to consolidate here. We went with Martin. That gets us on the board for the defensive side of the ball. Ultimately, we can't really change the fact that this draft is going to be very offensively focused. We used our big capital on additions to that side of the ball, but at this point, you can't really make a whole lot of additions there anymore because your holes are pretty much non-existent. Even if you didn't make any changes before this draft, like in free agency or re-signing players, unless it was like maybe Juwan Taylor walking, you don't really need that much, if anything. So we'll probably keep hitting the defensive side of the ball. But with that said, we'll go ahead and move to the next pick. So we're back now. We're about to be on the board again. Got 20 seconds until our selection. So top of this board, you could go after an air tight end for depth. Outside of that, Jackson Kirkland could be a solid prospect at OT at this point. However, I think you're probably looking farther down the board here. We might go for the defensive line. So, around this point of the draft, just quite frankly not going to know as much about all of these players. But one guy that stands out right off the bat is Jalen Redmond. You see his size, pretty average, but still meets the constraints for the position. I don't think the team needs in their nose tackle, so I'd probably look past that. Now, perhaps you pick up an edge and try to develop someone. As we go really far down the list, I don't think they're going to draft this far down the board necessarily. Looking back at the top players, Carrington Valentine, as far as size, it's not exactly ideal. You might just go for the best defensive tackle on the board here. Tyler Lacey, kind of similar to the other guy we checked out. Size is alright. Need reinforcements on the defensive line. I think you want depth there. This would be a good place to go get it. The other way you could go is going with like a Luke Schoonmaker. He's probably the last good tight end on the board, other than I think Josh Wiley is on here. So let's go ahead. Let's hit defense again. We'll go Tyler Lacey with this pick. So get some depth there. These picks, once again, probably not going to play a huge impact on the team, but we're going to get depth for the interior of the defensive line, get a player to develop, and maybe have somewhat of an impact on the roster. So we got one more selection left. It'll be a little bit till we get to that pick, so I'll talk to you in just a second. Alright, so we are back for our last selection here. We have the Houston Texans selecting, and then the New York Giants are up, and then we finally make our last selection. So Trevor Downing going here. We've got two players that we were looking at this point. There was two others as well that I was considering, but both of those players have gone off the board. One of those was O'Shawn Mathis going to the Colts. Was going to be a developmental edge player for this team. And really at this point in the draft, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for guys who have the physical tools that need to develop, that can become impact players someday. So I've got two players left that I'm considering at this selection. One of those is Trevor Reed, who fits a lot of that description. A player who can develop, who has the physical tools. Now, with Trevor Reed, something on him. He has a lack of upper body strength, so he's a player you're probably going to put in the weight room early on in his career. You want him to build up strength, so there's going to be conditioning with him for a while, and ultimately he's probably not going to be a guy who really even sniffs the field his first year in the NFL. However, with that said, if you can develop that strength and work on his game the first year, you can turn him into a solid NFL player. And not that that's going to happen, but that's the kind of stuff you're looking for at this point. The other option I think we've got here that would make some sense is just getting a backup quarterback for this team. You're picking late in the draft, and this is around the point where teams can look at the board and say, we want to get this guy to back up our franchise quarterback. Or they're looking at kickers and punters. Like, there's more guys that really come into the question of being selected. So we'll see what the Giants go after here, and then we'll make our selection to wrap this up. So, yeah, picking up a cornerback. For this pick, I'm going to go with Trevor Reed. 2 reasons. One, I think it's more valuable. And the second reason, I think the Jaguars are doing something with Nathan Rourke based off the contract he signed with the team. Not that it's like you can't get out of it, but I think they have plans for him going down the road. So I'm not sure Duggan would even really have a role with the team unless he just straight up replaced him. So we're going to finish this off with Trevor Reed. Hit the offense one more time. So with that said, let's do one last final evaluation on this draft. So first big thing really with this is that you didn't get to hit the defense a whole lot until really midway through day 3. And it's definitely something that is not ideal, but you got to look at what you did outside of the defense, and I think it makes it worth it in this mock draft. I still think that this would be something the Jaguars could feel happy with if they brought this home for their team. So it's an extreme focus on offense, and that's the way the board fell. For where I rank players and how I considered all these guys, I genuinely felt like, for the first half of the draft, it was an offensive prospect who was the best guy on our board. O'Cyrus Torrence, where we selected, I think he was the best player. At that point, he's someone who could go in the top 15, top 20. He should be in that range. So landing him at 24 is really good. And, we obviously talked about we want to focus more on value for these selections. But O'Cyrus Torrence does fit a need for this team. He gives you a really good left guard. Can also play right guard if you need it. Say that Scherf goes down, you move Torrence over, you put in Ben Barch again. Torrence is just a really good player to add to the squad that can start right off the bat. And then your second selection, you're getting a guy with a ton of upside. Player who's already got a pretty high floor at the tight end position, just a really great consolation prize if you can't land Michael Mayer or Darnell Washington earlier on. And for some people, they'll have Darnell Washington ranked higher than Luke Musgrave. Flip that around. Luke Musgrave over Darnell Washington. So that's a really good pick at that point in the draft. I think it's worth a lot. We'll exit out of this. Have these popping up here and there. The third selection, Xavier Hutchinson. I think it's another good addition to this team, and it's a smart one. Not just because of, he's from Jacksonville, but for what he does on the team. He's a player who's comped to Marvin Jones, a little bit of Keenan Allen as well if you're talking about his slot play. He immediately replaces Marvin Jones for cheap, and he gives you a future receiver that you can develop. I think after this next year, you can make an argument that Hutchinson becomes a starter. Now, you may have to move on from someone, or you will, or one of those players gets demoted, which would be Zay Jones, if that happens. But, you're fine with that as long as Hutchinson just earns it straight up. I think he's a good enough player to do it. Your fourth selection here, Kenny McIntosh. For him, He's just a great fit for this team. He's an offensive weapon, something that Doug Peterson can use. He can line up anywhere on the offense. He can really do about everything. And I think as a running back, he'll be really good too. He'll be a great complement to Travis Etienne. The only thing you're really missing in that backfield, and maybe JaMychal Hasty brings this to you, is just your run blocking. Or sorry, I got that wrong again. Your pass blocking. Out of your running backs, Etienne's not that great at it. McIntosh isn't known for it. So, out of those two guys, you really don't have that factor there. So, just something to consider. And after that, you're getting Jartavius Martin. I think you could have selected him later, but there was a chance he was going to go off the board, and with all the extra picks we had, I felt comfortable moving up for him. Make sure we land him so you get yourself a guy that you can develop in the slot, someone who's a little underrated right now, some people who really like this guy. And I think he could fit in pretty well with the Jaguars this next year. After that, you're really just looking for guys to develop. Tyler Lacey, he's got the physical tools, something you want to find late in the draft, but he's got to develop. He'll be a rotational guy at most at the start, and then you see where it goes. And with Trevor Reed, you've got another guy. He may need to put on some strength, but you got the physical tools to do it. And if he can learn and develop, then maybe you got something worthwhile there. Or even if it's just a backup, someone you can rely on in a pinch. I mean, that's a great pick at that point in the draft. So overall, I like this draft a lot. You fix your offense pretty much everywhere. You get really great talent. You're going to have this talent for cheap for quite a while. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you don't really get to hit a lot of your needs, but you still get a couple guys you can develop. And ultimately, like we talked about at the beginning, you're expecting to fix a lot of these needs in free agency. Not that you're going to get world beaters or guys worth $12 million a year, but you're going to get someone. So that's where we're going to finish this up. Let me know what you think. Like I said, obviously, huge focus on offense. A little different. Probably won't see too much of this in the future, but just the way this draft fell. So thank you for watching. Let me know what you want to see on the channel. And until next time, you have a great rest of your day.